We are on to week number 8 in fantasy football, and it's time to set those waivers to get yourself ready for not just week 8, but also the stretch run. So let's dive on in and break down who you should be prioritizing this week in your season-long leagues. Welcome on into the Waiver Wire Q&A. That is right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, and Facebook channels, where today we are answering your questions as you fill out those waiver runs for tonight and tomorrow across your season-long leagues. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by JJ Zacharyson. He is the editor-in-chief of numberFire and FanDuel. JJ, we are matching today. This is kind of weirding me out. I don't know how to feel about this.
We're like the Spider-Man meme right now, right?
A little bit.
I gotta say, I really, really like your hoodie, Jim.
Thank you. I adore yours as well. I feel like, we should do this more often. I think that Brandon Gadula and I have matched once on the Heat Check. It was with our numberFire hoodies, though, now with the FanDuel one. So we're breaking new grounds here, and I feel like, the cohesion, the synergy, it's necessary to have a great stream.
I feel closer to you right now. I feel closer.
Yes, exactly. Spiritually connected here on the Waiver Wire Q&A. We're going to do things here the same way as usual, where we're going to answer your questions about waiver wires. Most of them will come from the FanDuel YouTube page. So make sure you go to the FanDuel YouTube page. Make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page, and then get those questions here live on the air. Let's start things off here with the Aircoos, who is asking, will you advise me to waste my number one waiver wire priority pickup on Carlos Hyde? He has Kenyon Drake, Miles Sanders, and Chris Carson on the team, and they're all out. The problem is that Carlos Hyde, we now know, is also banged up with a hamstring injury. So, JJ, with that in mind, would you use a number one waiver priority on Carlos Hyde, or would you stick around and try to see if he slips through, see if you can get DJ Dallas or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't have used a number one priority on Hyde even if he were 100% right now. Main reason, doesn't sound like Chris Carson's injury is that serious. And I also don't think that we should assume that Hyde, like if Hyde were 100%, he would be the pickup in that backfield, right? But I still think there should be a caveat to that, because I wouldn't expect necessarily him to just play the Chris Carson role. I think that they might end up getting some of the other running backs, DJ Dallas even, more involved in the passing game. Travis Homer is thrown in there a little bit in that game against Arizona. But yes, Carlos Hyde did see the majority of the touches in that backfield when Chris Carson went down. But given the fact that he is banged up, to me, the move this week would be to not put in a claim for Carlos Hyde if it's resetting your waiver priority, not put a claim in for Carlos Hyde, wait and see if no one picks up DJ Dallas. And if it's in a PPR league in particular, because Dallas can catch the ball well out of the backfield, I would just go for DJ Dallas if I'm in a pinch, if I really need that desperate play. But if I'm good at running back, I probably am just kind of avoiding this backfield this week.
Yeah, and DJ Dallas, it's not just Hyde, it's not just Carson, it's also Travis Homer who's banged up. So DJ Dallas, the one healthy guy in that backfield, so I'd agree. Hold off, save that number one waiver priority, and see if you can get one of those guys afterwards. Daniel is asking, thoughts on Ezekiel Elliott the rest of the way? Is he a sell or a hold? Zeke, not only dealing with a potential third-string quarterback, not only dealing with a potential third-string everything along the offensive line, but also losing work to Tony Pollard. So the situation is bad. The workload is getting worse. What are your thoughts on Zeke right now?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the best way to answer this is to say where I would view Zeke in fantasy from here on out. And instead of, if Dak were healthy, if that offensive line were healthy, Zeke's a top 5 guy, right? Mm-hmm. But with all the stuff that's going on, the injuries to that line, and obviously the injury to Andy Dalton, et cetera, I would probably look at Zeke as more of like a high-end RB2 right now. Maybe a low-end RB1 just based on volume alone and the fact that the running back position just kind of sucks. But there's decent running backs right now out there who are seeing more and more work. So if you're looking at like if I were to throw out a name like Jonathan Taylor versus Zeke, I think that's the range that we're looking at, and I might even favor Taylor at this point because the environment's better and the offensive line's going to get more push. So that's where I'm at. I think that he's just one of those players, and similar to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a sell for me this week, but it's one of those situations where his valuation is going to be all over the place because you don't know how the managers in your league are going to view the Le'Veon Bell situation, where I view it as what we saw this past week we saw a decrease in running back rush share for CEH. Bell's coming in. That was his first game stepping in. The routes run weren't that different between the two guys. I know that I'm going on a tangent here, but what I'm basically saying is that each league and the managers in your league are going to view these guys differently. So with like a CEH, I view him as a mid-range RB2, maybe even closer to a low-end one, but some might view him as a high-end RB2 or even a low-end RB1. With Zeke, I would probably view him as more of a high-end RB2, maybe low-end RB1. If you can get him, him in a piece for like a Dalvin Cook or something, then I'm all about doing something like that.
Yeah, and it only takes one. Like, if you can find one true believer in Zeke Elliott remaining in your league, like, that can help things out quite a bit. So definitely base it on what you can get in return for sure. Samir is asking, hi, guys, would you drop Noah Fant for Richard Rodgers, Irv Smith, or Jared Cook? I think that Jared Cook, potentially the most interesting name on that list, with Emmanuel Sanders on the COVID list, Michael Thomas maybe on the trade block. Would you drop Noah Fant for those guys, or is Fant's usage once he gets more acclimated tantalizing enough to keep him?
Yeah, it's tough because I don't know how 100% he was this past week, because Albert O still got a lot of run in that offense, and we could just end up seeing a lot of 12 personnel for them, which wouldn't be shocking because of the injuries that they've had at wide receiver. But yeah, I mean, I would argue strongly that of those guys, Fant has the most upside and the most potential. But if you need someone to score points ASAP and next week, I think that your point with Jared Cook makes a lot of sense. And honestly, if we still don't see Dallas Goedert, I think that Richard Rodgers even makes some sense in a plus matchup. So, long term, I would probably prefer Fant, but short term, I might prefer some of the other guys.
Yeah, I would bet that as Fant gets more acclimated, he probably gets ramped up. And I think that is why, like you said, the upside play may be to hold Fant there if you can afford to, but hopefully not start him right away in week 8. Daniel is asking, thoughts on Josh Allen? Is he no longer a plug-and-play must-start, or would you play the week-to-week game and start Wentz versus Dallas, for example? Now, Josh Allen, obviously the Bills' offense didn't score any touchdowns in week number 7. However, they kind of just stalled out in the red zone. It wasn't as if their team was awful. They didn't meet expectations against a Jets defense that was pretty bad, but John Brown doesn't seem like he'll be out a super long time. Josh Allen still has some rushing. So are you still viewing Josh Allen as being an every week starter?
I think that you can make the argument that not this week, because they're facing New England, right? In New England, according to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers, they're actually the toughest matchup to opposing quarterbacks this year. They rank, I believe, fourth best or fourth worst, I guess, when you don't adjust for strength of opponent. But when you do, they end up ranking the absolute worst matchup for quarterbacks. Given the fact that Carson Wentz is facing Dallas, I think that you can make the argument that this week, because I think they mentioned Carson Wentz, I think you can make the argument that this week Carson Wentz is a better play. Would I drop Josh Allen? No, I wouldn't be dropping Josh Allen to stream. He has a high floor each week because he does still get that rushing. The one thing I will point out about Buffalo, too, is that this season they have 16 passing touchdowns to just 4 rushing touchdowns. It's a 4.0 pass-to-rush touchdown ratio. That's the third highest in the NFL, and that number tends to regress closer to like 2, right? So what we should see moving forward is maybe more rushing touchdowns for the Bills than passing touchdowns. Hopefully those rushing touchdowns are from Josh Allen, but that's a little bit scary about his upcoming outlook. But I still think that he's rosterable. I don't know if he's plug and play per se, at least this week, just given what we've seen recently from him.
Yeah, and I think the good thing for this week is that for them is that the Patriots have been especially beatable on the ground.
Right.
So maybe they can get that ground game going and kind of, bottle things up with Josh Allen, not use him as much against such a tough pass defense, but we'll see for sure. But like you said, the rushing touchdown reversion may actually favor him as well. Shrey is asking, Travis Fulgham or Chris Godwin rest of season? You had mentioned on your podcast talking about how you'd rather have Travis Fulgham than Mike Evans, but since then Chris Godwin has gotten hurt. He will miss at least week 8. Would that push you towards Fulgham, or are you still leaning Godwin there?
That's really tough because of the, injury aside, I would probably say Godwin, even with AB coming back. But versus Mike Evans, like you said, I would say Fulgham. I think I would probably go with Godwin and hope that he comes back next week, but that's way too close. It's a lot closer than people probably realize.
And I think the thing that helps with Godwin is that Tom Brady's playing really good football right now. Antonio Brown being there should help increase the team's offensive efficiency, even if it does decrease his target share. Whereas with Fulgham, Dallas Goedert will be back, and Jalen Reagor probably going to be back pretty soon too. And that may decrease the target share, but he's been awesome. So it's hard to take away targets with how well he has played. Jared is asking, would you drop Preston Williams for Rashard Higgins or Denzel Mims? So we get into a couple of waiver wire wide receivers this week. Would you drop Williams for either of those guys, Higgins or Mims?
Yeah, so Tua's coming back, or Tua's going to be starter. Shouldn't say coming back. I guess he's kind of coming back. But so Tua's going to be starter. You know, we mentioned it on the show. I wouldn't say that there's this like massive downgrade for Miami's passing attack per se. It's not like they were, you know, the top 5 efficiency team or anything like that in terms of passing effectiveness. You know, they were a little bit above average, and they were a little bit above average pretty much across the board, however you slice it. And it's not like Ryan Fitzpatrick was really throwing the ball down the field like we'd seen with like him and a Bruce Arians offense, right? He wasn't as D-gaffy as what we've seen in the past, which is why, you know, he's been phenomenal for fantasy purposes. So I don't think that the move to Tua is going to do that much per se. Maybe they get a little bit more conservative. And really the reason that you would want Preston Williams, in my opinion, is because he just happens to build some sort of rapport with Tua, right? Like maybe that's something that could happen, whether it's him or Devontae Parker. But the guys that are on the waiver wire right now, what was it? It was
Higgins and Mims.
Higgins and Mims. So I think that rest of season, Higgins is more intriguing to me than Denzel Mims. I love Denzel Mims as a prospect. I hate Denzel Mims' environment within that Adam Gase offense. But with Rashard Higgins, he's going to be the number 2 there. He saw over 20% of the team's targets in that Week 7 game. They have a really good schedule the next 5 weeks. I think that if he continues to see that 20-ish% target share in that offense that's cooking, relatively speaking, you know, probably versus what the consensus thinks that they're doing right now, the Browns offense actually not been that bad offensively. I would probably lean Higgins. I think Higgins could be like a pretty strong wide receiver 3 from here on out.
Well, and you were talking about building the rapport between Tua and Preston Williams, but Rashard Higgins and Baker Mayfield actually have a really solid rapport dating back to like when Baker was a rookie. And like, I think that's kind of gone overlooked. It's weird how good of a connection they've had. And I think that that's valuable for Higgins in the short term, but also the long run. Chad is asking, what are your thoughts on Cam Newton? Is he even a streaming option, or are we all overreacting? Cam has been pretty brutal the past 2 weeks. And I mean, you can blame it on offensive line injuries, but when they keep losing additional offensive linemen and their wide receivers aren't going to get any better, it's tough to see a ton of reasons for optimism. I know the rushing could potentially bounce back a bit, but I'm having a hard time finding reasons to get super jazzed about Cam right now. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I had Cam as a drop in 15 transactions today, which you guys can find the Late Round Podcast, anywhere podcasts can be found. But I dropped the 15 transactions episode today. Cam Newton was a drop for me. And that's more in shallower leagues. I think if you're in a 12 or 14, you can probably hold on to him. But yeah, I mean, the problem with Cam is that he's running the ball less. The first couple of games of the season, he averaged 13 rush attempts per game. The last 3 that he's played, he's averaged 8 per game. And then on top of that, the first couple of games that we were all jazzed about the fact that I can't believe I just said jazzed, but we were all.
So I think I planted that in your brain.
Yeah. Okay. Did you?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I infiltrated your brain. It's the hoodies. That's why.
Yeah. Exactly. But so we were all excited about what Cam did weeks 1 and 2 because he had multiple rushing touchdowns in those games. Clearly, that wasn't going to maintain and keep up. But what you should hope for is, okay, if he's not running the ball in, they're going to throw the ball in, and they're going to do more in the passing game as a result. Well, what's happened is outside of that Seattle game, which we know is one of the most beatable secondaries in football right now, outside of that Seattle game, he hasn't thrown for more than 200 yards in a single game. And then he's also not running the ball as much. So it's a complete disaster. It's a complete mess. I don't know how you can confidently start him this week, but I think that if you have the roster space, you should at least, in like a 12, 14 team league, hold on to him. The way that I sort of played it on the podcast today was that if Joe Burrow, this is like my baseline, if Joe Burrow is on your waiver wire right now, then that means that there are good quarterbacks on your waiver wire and you don't have to worry about dropping Cam Newton. You can just drop him. Or if Burrow was picked up like last week or something like that. But if your alternatives are like Sam Darnold, then no, don't drop Cam Newton. Yeah.
That got me. Okay, all right. So I'm going to give you this question now to keep in the back of your head because it's kind of hard to ask you this one on the spot. Chris said, you had mentioned Keenan Allen as someone as a buy high and Mike Evans as a sell low in 15 transactions this week. He was wondering if you had any other names at the top of your head as buy highs or sell lows you'd be looking at. So I'm going to let you think about that one for a bit. It's kind of have it in the back of your brain, because it's kind of hard to come up with those.
Yeah, it's hard to come on. Yeah, it is.
So I'll let that one simmer for a bit. We can come back to it later on in case any come to your mind. If you think of one, just let me know, but we'll come back to that later on. Terry is asking, hey, JJ, would you trade Adam Thielen for George Kittle? I like Kittle's playoff schedule. Personally, I like George Kittle's workload. I think it's awesome. Yeah. What do you think about that trade there?
I generally side with the wide receivers, the players who play positions that are in higher demand in deals. But at the same time, I think that with Thielen, you're in a situation where they're a pretty run heavy team. There is some regression coming. I mean, I think it's a fair swap overall. I don't think it's that crazy.
I mean, they're both going to get they're both getting 30% of the targets right now, which is wild. Yeah. That's not going to stick. That number won't stick. But they're both getting a pretty heavy target share, regardless of position.
The way I would say, what I would say is, if you have a good alternative to swap in for Adam Thielen, then you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Thielen's going to have higher upside because of the yardage, the deep shots he gets, but Kittle's floor is just rock solid. Jared is asking, would you trade Josh Jacobs for Antonio Gibson and Robbie Anderson? So some interesting names here. Jacobs obviously has had a rough go of it recently, but is still getting decent work, whereas Antonio Gibson seems to be on the ascent, and Robbie Anderson just had an amazing floor all year long. Would you trade Josh Jacobs for Antonio Gibson and Robbie Anderson?
Probably. So I will say this. This is sort of goes back to the question, because I've been now thinking about guys who I can buy high and sell low on. But I can at least tell you that one guy that I thought of buying high on was Antonio Gibson. Because we've seen him just get better and better as a player. His workload has sort of shifted. This past week it was great, but the week before that wasn't nearly as good. And obviously he played Dallas, so that's going to play into it a little bit as well. But sometimes you just got to buy into the talent and buy into the situation a little bit. And the situation improving, I should say. And that's why I think Antonio Gibson's not a bad buy high after what he did this past week. But I will say on my short list for 15 transactions was to buy Josh Jacobs. And I said I didn't put him in the column, didn't talk about him because I'm still scared that what we saw this past week and what we've seen with them just throwing Jalen Rashard onto the field and using these pass catching backs instead of Jacobs, that can continue. But his peripherals are still overall not bad, not horrific. They've gotten worse. Yeah. But what I like about Jacobs is that the Raiders have gone through the gauntlet in terms of sort of defenses that they faced for running backs in particular. It hasn't been very favorable for Jacobs, and that opens up a whole lot. With that being said, this trade in particular, I don't think the difference between Jacobs and Gibson is so drastic to throw a guy like Robbie Anderson in there, who's a top 20 wide receiver from here on out. So I would probably lean that side, even though I typically go with the 1 in a 2-for-1 deal.
Yeah, and I think that with Josh Jacobs too, things should get better. That offensive line was messed up last week with the COVID stuff. Hopefully Trent Brown can be back pretty soon. Yeah, right. Incognito getting healthier, so that could help. But like you said, that's 2 solid pieces to get back. So at least you're not selling low on Josh Jacobs. Joseph is asking, would you trade Deontay Johnson for Chase Edmonds? Deontay Johnson, a guy who has had amazing usage when he's been healthy. Got banged up again. Chase Edmonds, they have a bye this week, but it sounds like he will be the guy coming out of the bye with Kenyon Drake banged up. So would you rather have Deontay Johnson or Chase Edmonds in this situation?
It's so hard. Chase Edmonds has such a wide range of outcomes. But I will say with Chase, I think that what we're going to see, if you believe in the talent, which I do, I believe you do too. But if you believe in that the Chase Edmonds talent, then what could easily happen is similar to what happened last year with Kenyon Drake, where Drake gets an opportunity, this time it's Chase Edmonds, to showcase being a workhorse, and then he just never looks back. And in this case, Kenyon Drake this year is David Johnson last year, right? There's just a cycling. Hopefully Chase Edmonds gets this job and this doesn't happen to him next year. Well, maybe it's Eno Benjamin, and I like Eno Benjamin. But, I the way that I see it, I think that's a decent enough trade between those two guys. I will say that I'm a Deontay stan as well, so it's very difficult for me to trade him away. I mean, the guy has seen over a 30% target share in his every single healthy game that he's played this year. It's very hard to give something like that up. But if you need running back help desperately, and you need high upside, really, that's what this comes down to. Maybe you're like a 3-4 team or something like that, and you just need that spark and that upside. I think it's fine enough.
I will also mention, if you are in a league where somehow Chase Edmonds is still available, make sure you get him. And I know that he is actually out there in a couple because he hasn't gotten the best workload. So if he is out there, make sure you add him now as opposed to waiting to after the bye. Joseph also asked, would you trade Clyde Edwards-Helaire for Nick Chubb? Nick Chubb sounds like he might be back after the bye. So 2 more weeks for no Nick Chubb, potentially coming back after that. Clyde Edwards-Helaire now splitting a bit with Le'Veon Bell. So would you do that move of CEH for Chubb?
I mean, look, if I were set up in a pretty good spot, I would do it. If I'm like 6-1 right now and I'm looking at the playoffs and I'm looking forward, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I see Chubb as someone who's going to probably give you just as good of a baseline, but just has more touchdown upside. I still worry about the Chiefs using Le'Veon Bell close to the end zone too, and seeing those goal line looks. And like I said, if you look at the discrepancy in target share between CEH and Le'Veon Bell in that game, Le'Veon Bell didn't see a single target in the game. CEH saw a 16.7% target share, but Le'Veon Bell only ran 4 fewer routes than CEH did. So that's going to probably shift a little bit. We might not see as good of a target share number for CEH moving forward. So I think it's fine. If you're in a good spot right now, I think that you can pull the trigger.
Yeah, Nate Yonke of Pro Football Focus was going through the usage of the 2 Chiefs running backs today, and apparently they were just switching drives, which is kind of scary. So I think that makes sense too. Jacob's asking, should I keep CeeDee Lamb or drop him for Jalen Reagor in a PPR redraft? CeeDee Lamb was fun when Dak was healthy, but now they're not throwing a whole lot. His quarterback situation is poo, and his target share is a bigger issue now that they're not throwing as much. So would you drop him for Jalen Reagor in a redraft league?
I mean, look, I try to keep CeeDee Lamb. I mean, I would still want him on my roster to just see if things improve in the passing attack there. But, if you need upside and this is more of a bench play than a starter for you, I think that you can make the argument that Jalen Reagor has more upside than CeeDee Lamb moving forward. Okay,
let's go to Francis here. They asked us to rank these pickups as a bench stash. I'm just going to ask you which one's your favorite, because that seems a lot easier. Damian Harris, JaMychal Hasty, Carlos Hyde, Travis Homer, DJ Dallas, Eno Benjamin, Tony Pollard. If you had to pick one of those guys as a bench stash, it sounds like not an immediate need for Francis. Where would you go there?
I would probably go with JaMychal Hasty, I think.
Okay, so actually our next question was from Corey King. He just says Hasty in all caps with a question mark. So just give us our breakdown of JaMychal Hasty here.
So I think he's a good prospect. He was someone that my model liked a decent bit, before the draft capital side of things was inputted. But the other guys that were mentioned there just don't really do it for me. I mean, Damian Harris isn't going to see a lot of volume through the air, and Sony Michel's going to be back eventually. I just don't want anything to do with that backfield. And then you look at the Seattle backfield, we can't really answer confidently right now, right? So I'm going to push that aside. Who else was on that? Tony Pollard. I mean, that's the thing too. So Tony Pollard is basically, he's still just a handcuff, right? But you're not handcuffing an amazing situation anymore.
Right.
So Tony Pollard to me is not even that. I don't want him that much. I mean,
he's like what Chase Edmonds was if Chase Edmonds were on a really bad offense.
Yeah, I mean, like what the reason that you're holding on to Chase Edmonds and the reason that you were holding on to Alexander Mattison, I know that he didn't come through whenever he did get his name called, but
don't remind me.
Yeah, but like the reason you're holding on to those guys is because at least their offenses have the opportunity to be explosive. But I just don't know that exists for Dallas anymore. So, the backup running back. So clearly Dallas thinks that Tony Pollard's not as good as Zeke. We should just assume that's the case. But I would, I think that you could argue that Tony Pollard's not bad. But if that's the case, then him stepping up and being the starting running back for Dallas, he's an RB2 probably. So he's not as nearly as good of a stash as he was before. So I think that's why I'm just like leaning Hasty and saying, hey, look, he looked really good last week. This is a banged up backfield. Tevin Coleman should come back, which scares me a little bit, but that's not really what you should be looking at with like a stash like this. You shouldn't be looking at like what scares you. You should be looking at the path to upside, and the path to upside for Hasty is, Raheem Mostert can't stay healthy. Tevin Coleman is not very good. And Jerick McKinnon couldn't find the field. So maybe there is the potential that Hasty ends up, carving out a workload there. But I would say that I'm not like in love with any of these guys.
Yeah, but taking swings at a Kyle Shanahan backfield is never a bad idea. If they can get volume, just throw them out there and see what happens. I think that's the way to do it. Kenny, and this one actually relates to a question we got from Facebook from DJ. Kenny was asking about a wide receiver to pick up in full PPR. It was Rashard Higgins, Nelson Agholor, or Denzel Mims. We talked about Higgins versus Mims before, so let's talk about Nelson Agholor because we did not talk about him previously. DJ was asking, should he drop Christian Kirk for Nelson Agholor? So give me your overall thoughts on Nelson Agholor here with the Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always thought that Agholor was not that bad of a receiver. He just can't get it together between his ears, it seems like. But this past week, he saw a really good target share in that game against Tampa. He was relatively productive. My fear is that when Bryan Edwards comes back, we're not going to see nearly as much Nelson Agholor. And that's the main reason why I'm not, I was thinking about maybe throwing him out there in 15 transactions. And the same thing goes with like Marquez Callaway, right? Where it's like I don't think that he's bad at all. I actually think that he's a great like dynasty ad, for instance, or someone that you should have rostered in dynasty. That was the case even before this week. But when guys come back, like when Michael Thomas comes back, that 30% of the team's targets are going to go to Michael Thomas. And then all of a sudden the rest of that team, maybe aside from Jared Cook and Emmanuel Sanders coming back too, the rest of the team, they're not going to really be that productive from a fantasy perspective. So I do worry that when Bryan Edwards is healthy, he steps in. Nelson Agholor doesn't get as much love. And like I said earlier, I really like Rashard Higgins, and I like Denzel Mims too off the waiver wire.
Yeah, and I think the one thing with DJ's question that is concerning is when Edwards gets back, Agholor could dry up, which is why I'd keep Kirk, because like at least Kirk, we know he'll be on the field and like he gets usage. So he's not a great wide receiver play, but like he's a guy we can turn to at times. Other question from Facebook was from Joe Melly. Do you think Wayne Gallman will take over the Giants' backfield? Now, Devontae Freeman got banged up last week. And I love Wayne Gallman.
Yeah, so I'm smirking right now. Yeah.
I've gone to rehab for Wayne Gallman multiple times. But they know what Wayne Gallman is. Still decided to sign Devontae Freeman and use Devontae Freeman pretty heavily when he was healthy. So even though Wayne Gallman looked good, as he always does because he's amazing, I'm still hesitant to think that Gallman will be the guy in this backfield. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, he looked good against Philly. I can't deny that. He had a good game there, but I agree. I mean, here's the thing. The only way that Wayne Gallman is relevant in fantasy football from here on out is if he takes over that backfield. And to your point, Jim, they signed Devontae Freeman. I would be very, very surprised if Freeman's healthy, if he's not the guy seeing at least some touches. And then Dion Lewis sees touches too in that backfield. So I would not be really caring about Wayne Gallman. Not only that, but it's not a great offense in general.
Exactly. If you're going to take swipes to good teams. Travis asks, is Donovan Peoples-Jones worth a stash? Peoples-Jones, 3 targets on Sunday. One of those was from Jarvis Landry on a really sick throw. He didn't run as many routes as Rashard Higgins, but, I mean, he was a really athletic guy. He was, I think, a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. Would you add him if you had the bench space, or what are your thoughts on Donovan Peoples-Jones?
He's just a deep ad. I mean, think of it this way. Rashard Higgins was not relevant in fantasy football when OBJ was healthy, right? So Donovan Peoples-Jones is playing that role because I would assume Rashard Higgins is going to play the OBJ role. And part of the problem with that too is that, we might not see, we likely won't see continuing a lot of 11 personnel for this Browns offense where we get 3 wide receivers on the field at once because they have and they utilize their tight ends at such a high rate. So as a result of that, Peoples-Jones to me is more of a dynasty ad / hold than someone that I'm adding in redraft. But, if you're in a deeper league, like a 16-team league, it's fine.
Yeah, I think the thing, too, is Rashard Higgins is probably on some dynasty waiver wires, too. And that's a fun situation. We don't get fun guys on dynasty waivers all that often. So I'd check out there to see if he is available. That is all the time that we have for today. But do not forget, we'll be here for our Snake Draft live on air on Friday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on these same channels, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope. JJ has his start-sit Q&A every Sunday at noon Eastern time. So make sure you are subscribed on your channel of choice to get notifications as we go live each and every day. We also have our Heat Check Fantasy podcast live here as well. 2 NFL podcasts per week on Monday and Thursday. PGA podcast every Tuesday as well. JJ, where can people find 15 transactions and all of your other work?
Yeah, so the article for 15 transactions is on numberFire.com. The podcast is the Late Round Podcast, which you can find anywhere podcasts can be found. And then I am on Twitter at Late Round QB.
All righty. Thank you to JJ, and thank you to our video producer, Calvin Theobald, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And, of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in. Good luck with your waiver runs for week number 8, and good luck with the week 8 as well. We'll talk to you again later this week. This has been the Waiver Wire Q&A.